So there I was, standing once again at the start of a brand new Oblivion run, wondering how I was going to make the lands of Cyrodiil even more miserable than it already is. And then it hit me. What if I played the whole game like some kind of bug? No, I've already done that. I've got it. Potions. Well, what about potions? I hadn't really gotten that far yet. Wait, I think you're actually on something. Potions. What about, can you beat Oblivion with only potions? Meaning, I'd only be free to heal, deal damage, and buff myself, but only if the effects granted came from the potions themselves. No swords, no spells, just slamming flasks like an alchemical frat bro. Alright, for the rules of this run, if it's not coming from a potion, it's off limits. I can only deal damage, heal, or fortify myself using the effects of potions. Refer to rule number 1. No scrolls, no weapons, no combat magic, just potions. Again, refer back to rules 1 and 2 for clarification. And lastly, I'm playing this on Adept difficulty. And not because I'm a coward, no. More so Oblivion's difficulty slider is less of a challenge scaler and more of a masochism meter. Now, side note, I actually started this run on Master difficulty because I thought I was being cool and different and better than everyone else, but the moment a scamp tickled my health bar with a bit too much as soon as I got to Kavach, I immediately slammed that slider down to Adept because, well, maybe I am a coward. Okay, now it's time to create our hero. For my race, I chose the Bretons. Why? Because 50% magic resistance is like having a permanent fuck you buff in a game where over half the enemies in it are constantly throwing fire at your face. The birth sign I chose was the sign of the Lord because 15 extra armor and 15% magic resist on top of being a Breton are a nice pile of salt in the wound. And I built a custom class that I named the Addict, which I found was a pretty fitting name for someone who was going to be more bottle dependent than the Imperial City's town drunk. Now, while forming the face of our hero, I tried recreating Dennis from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia because this run was going to be all about manipulation, addiction, and a slow descent into madness. The Golden God would be proud. Now, I'm not going to waste a lot of time talking about the sewer section, mostly because I literally just went over pretty much everything that's relevant throughout that last section, but also because there was nothing of value or really much of interest down here except for some early ingredients and the crushing realization that I now need to grind my alchemy skill up to 75. But on the bright side, at least I'm not doing this with Kingdom Come's alchemy system. Instead, I get to do this for a little over an hour. Once I'd gotten out of the sewers and up to the Imperial City, I did what any newly released alchemical degenerate would do and pawned off everything that wasn't an ingredient, potion, or these rags I was calling clothes. With a few septims now in my pocket and an unquenchable thirst for drinkable stimulants, I hoofed it all the way over to Skingrad. This place is like the Napa Valley of Cyrodiil. Just outside its city walls, you'll find a huge vineyard and a few tomatoes that nobody seems to mind me just walking up to and stealing. I had harvested this area until every bush was picked clean. But before I could start mixing up my delicious homebrewed concoctions, I needed access to some low-level alchemy gear. So I went into Skingrad proper, joined the Mages Guild, and then helped myself to every novice mortar and pestle they had lying around. Look, the Arcane University has rules against murder and necromancy, but none covering outright theft. So that's on them. With my easy bake alchemy set secured, I began my literal grind for levels. 1 grape plus 1 tomato equals 1 restore fatigue potion. It's pretty basic, it's beautiful, but it's the kind of entry-level chemistry that would make Walter White proud. Not Heisenberg, though. That guy's a dick.
What in the hell is this?
I brewed up all my potions, sold them for profit since I didn't necessarily need them, then used that profit to buy even more ingredients, which I then turned into more potions. It was a self-sustaining economy fueled by my refusal to actually fight anything. Kinda like real capitalism. After my foraging opportunities dried up here, I expanded my operation to the rest of Cyrodiil. Any farm, any bush, any corner of the wilderness that wasn't bolted down, I'd be there, scraping together all the garlic, onions, and any other fruits I could find to then make into a putrid slop that I'd force into every corner store's inventories. Once I hit 75 alchemy, I became blessed with the knowledge of the all-knowing, and now knew the effects of every plant, bone, meat slab, and bug part, and could finally make some more streamlined routes to my desired results. The effects that I was on the lookout for were Shield, because armor is for cowards, Reflect Spell, because magic users are cheaters, Reflect Damage, because I'm not allowed to punch back, and Restore Health, because being alive is kind of important. Now, I made a few chameleon potions here too, just for fun. I didn't think I'd need them or anything, but eventually I would. But we'll get to that. With my drug bag full and confidence at a serviceable level, I finally made my way to Wayneon Priory and talked to Joffrey to get the plot moving forward. After speaking with him and entrusting him with the Amulet of Kings, I was off to Kavach to deal with the Oblivion Gate terrorizing the town and find the heir to the throne. Now, at this point, I was still level 1, playing on Master difficulty, and as I crept up to that portal to hell, I simply took one single hit from a scamp before immediately backing that difficulty slider down to Adept. Now, remember those chameleon potions I mentioned brewing earlier? Yeah, those came in clutch for easily getting into and through the Oblivion Gate. I tossed back one of those bad boys and slipped past the opening ambush, sneaking my way into the main sigil tower and up to the man holding the sigil key. This keeper was the first real test on how this run would go. I chugged my flight of potions and let him start wailing on me like I was a piñata stuffed with nails. Eventually, through sheer attrition and reflected damage, he'd eventually keel over in defeat. I grabbed the key, sprinted up the tower, nabbed the sigil stone, and shut that gate faster than Bethesda shut down paid mods in 2015. But closing the gate was only half the battle. Kavach still needed saving, and frankly, my potions weren't quite good enough yet. So off I went, hunting for better alchemy gear. However, there was a problem. I'd read somewhere that higher quality alchemy equipment only spawns into the world once you level your character up, so I did the unthinkable. I slept. A lot. I leveled myself up to 11 by simply napping in hour intervals. After I'd finished my power nap marathon, I began looting some various dungeons in search of better gear. I found one little hatch, out in the woods, that became my own private loot farm. Out here was a dungeon that respawned its items every, 5 days, I think. As long as I traveled away before skipping time, it would reload its loot pool. But also, I could just save before entering, and if I didn't find what I was looking for down there, I could just reload my save and get different drops that way. Eventually, after many reloaded saves and weeks waited, I managed to pull a journeyman mortar pestle out of this cave. And let me tell you, the difference was remarkable. My reflect damage potions went from reflecting a mere 8% to a minus 15%, which is a massive jump when your sole combat strategy is to just fucking stand there and take it. Armed now with my upgraded chemistry set, I returned to Kavach expecting an epic showdown, but instead watched as every enemy immediately aggroed to Savlian and his men. They completely ignored me. It's like I wasn't even there, which was, frankly, offensive. Still, I helped wherever I could. After trying their best, unfortunately, nearly everyone fighting on my side had died. Eventually, the flame Atronachs would begin to surround me, each taking turns throwing fireballs that would hurt them more than it did me. After things cooled down, I went into the castle to get Savlian and the Count's ring, then left to find Brother Martin down at the refugee camp. I quickly made him aware of who he really was, and eventually persuaded him to join me into going back to Joffrey to reunite him with his father's amulet. But of course, just as we arrived, the Daedra were already pouring out of Wayneon Priory's doors. They attacked, I stood still, and they eventually offed themselves in a frivolous attempt to kill me. Ha! Classic. Next up, Cloud Ruler Temple. Upon our arrival, Joffrey gave some long-winded speech about, dragon fires and divine legitimacy, or whatever. What's next? Now, for the Mythic Dawn questline. Oh man, this is where I relearned a very painful lesson. You know, when you don't remember a thing, and then you go and trigger a thing that leads to that thing that you forgot about, leading you to remember that thing that you forgot, only for it to no longer be the thing you forgot, but, now the thing you remembered? Right. So that thing for me was remembering that when you join their cult, they take all your shit. Yeah. All my carefully brewed potions, all my tools of the trade, everything. Gone. Haro just yoinked it from my pockets. I'm surprised he didn't have me squat and cough with how thorough he was. And after unsuccessfully trying to loot my stuff back from Haro by dipping my fingers into the pockets of his robes, I eventually just decided to take the Mysterium Xarxes and run. Full on sprint out of there and all the way back to Cloud Ruler Temple. Unfortunately, once I was back in town, I had the realization that I had to basically start from scratch. All my ingredients, all my gear, the whole shebang. But I'll spare you on the details, because after rebuilding my inventory and handing over the book to Martin, there were supposedly reports of cultists loitering around the area of Bruma being like super weird and stuff, and I managed to catch wind and find 2 of them down near the big glowing like rock thing just down the mountain from the temple, and let them work through their unresolved father issues by using me as a punching bag. After they died and I looted their bodies, I went off to investigate their house. In the basement, I found their orders and promptly ratted them out, and that's how you solve a spy problem. It was time now to go get myself a Daedric artifact. And this is when I'd meet my match, Umbra. Her lifesteal was just too much and her sword hit harder than I anticipated, so I cut my losses and just ran for my life. After reevaluating my life choices, I eventually went to Namira's questline instead. Her whole thing is being like, the scum of the earth, real bottom of the barrel type shit. The problem with her is that to even start her questline, you have to have less riz than the world of t-shirts.
Which one is your favorite, Josh? Which one out of the 3? The left one.
Luckily, I had my trusty damage personality poisons already made and ready to drink, but then I remembered, oh right, you can't drink poisons. Thanks, Todd. Fortunately, Bethesda did make it so alcohol lowers your personality, and when you know it, cheap wine drops by 10 points per bottle. So I went and bought and chugged about a dozen of those like I was a medieval Edgar Allan Poe. The cultists were so impressed by this display of degeneracy, Namira gave me her blessing. But my quest involved me needing to use her shroud to lure some priests to their deaths. Since the shroud didn't deal any damage and I'm not the one doing the killing, I'm still a rule-abiding citizen here. Using their shroud spell on all the priests in the dungeon would cause the cultists to gank them, and after they were all gone, I'd return to Namira and I'd get her ring in return. This ring was imbued with both 12% reflect damage and 10% reflect spell on demand. Honestly, kinda gas. So much so that I figured I'd just keep it and get Martin a different artifact altogether. So I did. Nocturnal was who I chose to work with next. She wanted this weird mystical bird eyeball back or something. It was stolen and stashed somewhere in Leowyn, probably amongst some Argonians who needed it for their "we swear we're not a cult" rituals. I found the suspects, drank a chameleon potion for the second and last time, then played the world's dumbest game of espionage where they casually admitted where it was hidden. Tidewater Cave. The cave was guarded by a troll, a rat, and some swamp water stench I'm still trying to wash off. But I just sprinted past everything, swam through the cave system, grabbed the Eye of Nocturnal, and dipped the fuck back out without a second thought. Nocturnal would reward me with the skeleton key for completing her quest, which can be used to unlock any lock in the game. But I didn't really need it, so I handed it over to Martin, because if I'm giving up one of my 2 Daedric artifacts, I at least want to keep the one that lets me bounce damage back to people's faces. Next up on my list of to-dos was Sancretor, the home of Tiber Septim's armor, but also every single undead blade guarding it. I restocked on my potions, then went in with the intention of learning from my last run. The last time I did this, there was one particular blade that was much further from the tomb and took a lot longer to get back and take a knee. So I set off to locate and free him first. When I found him, he didn't have a skeleton attacking him this time, so I guess he was just like waiting for one to spawn or something. Since he was in no danger at this point, I tried to get him to start his walk to the tomb early to save time, but of course, Bethesda says no. We can't have logic in our games. I went off and freed the other 3 blades instead. Most of them suffered at the hands of my reflective potions, but oftentimes I'd even get some assistance from their little floating ghost buddies. After they'd started moving into place, I went off to the initial one I'd met with, who finally had a skeleton attacker spawned in. I stood there, letting him shatter his own health bar against my deadly skin. Then I had to wait another 5 minutes for the spirit to walk at the pace of the fucking DMV back to the tomb. Once the path was open, I grabbed the armor, bolted back to Cloud Ruler Temple, and handed it off to Martin. Now he needed a great Welkin Stone, and this meant I was off to Miskarkan. I used my time in this forgotten crypt to grind out some armor skill by letting anyone who wanted to try and hug me to death do so at their own risk. Unbeknownst to them, they'd be awarded with a death of their own. When I eventually made it to the stone and grabbed it for myself, the king of Miskarkan and his zombie goons would appear near the exit. But he must have been on the fen or something, because he just stood there for 2 whole minutes in between attacks like he'd forgotten why he was mad. I'd gotten bored of this and eventually just left, except apparently the king decided to follow me out of the ruins, across the lands of Cyrodiil and back to the Imperial City, where he'd be promptly ganked by the city guards like he'd just violated the law. Why or how he was here, I had no idea. I was now finally ready to face the Brumagate, so I went there, met up with a group of expendable soldiers, and jumped through that portal to lead them all into Oblivion. And almost as soon as I'd gotten in, I'd leave. Yeah, I was low on potions and I needed more, because I'm not going in there dry. I'm not a fucking psychopath. Once I was ready, I sprinted into the plains of Oblivion once again, leapt across the bridge gap, dodged some Daedra, and let the Bruma soldiers do most of the dying. The Daedra wouldn't target me for anything, so I had to beg them for attention like I was some kind of middle child or something. Still, I eventually made it to the tower, slapped the sigil stone out of its socket, and closed the gate. Too easy. Returning to Martin with the news and a Welkin Stone, he drops his wildest idea yet, opening a Great Gate. On purpose, outside of Bruma. And he wanted me to convince the Countess that this was a good idea. Bro's been Emperor for 6 minutes. Chill the fuck out. However, I did indeed convince her, got a full squad of soldiers, and decided not to ask help from any other cities. I'm sure we got this. With the first couple of gates opened, Daedra began pouring out, and once again, none of them wanted to touch me. I stood there, waving my arms around, trying to get their attention while they mowed down my entire squad of allies. I would occasionally bait one of them into their own demise, but it was pretty rare. Eventually, enough of our enemies would die and the Great Gate would spawn in. I bolted in, took the same path I always do. I entered and went up the right side tower, Reflect killed some Dremora at the top, pulled a lever to open the gates, busted into the main tower, and stole the Great Sigil Stone. All in less than 5 minutes. Now, with everything gathered, Martin could perform his magic ritual, and we could finally enter Mankar Cameron's paradise. The first thing I did when entering paradise was chug 7 potions, and then I let Catuit beat himself to death trying to prove a point. Then, with the help of Eldamil, I pushed through the rest of the realm until I made it all the way to Mankar Cameron's throne room. This fight is always a nightmare for me, and this run was no different. Mankar would heal 30% of his health whenever it would get somewhat low, so we basically did this weird death tango where he'd beat me up, lose health to the reflection, and then immediately undo it by simply casting a single spell. It was annoying, to say the least. After 30 minutes of trial and error, I finally pushed him into a weird corner next to his throne where, for some reason, he just stopped healing. I have no clue what happened. Maybe Eldamil's constant pressure messed with his AI enough. Maybe the wall had a secret code in the programming written into it specifically to deny Mankar from healing when next to it. Or maybe the game just got tired of this instance and wanted to move on. Either way, with Raven and Eldamil piling in around the fight, it created a pretty decent little dogpile, and Mankar finally folded. I grabbed the Amulet of Kings off his dead body, teleported back, and handed it off to Martin so we could go and finally finish this thing. We'd meet up with Akato in the Imperial City to make this coronation official. And then, during the last step, Mehrunes Dagon's army shows up and crashes our party. Oblivion gates burst open all around the area, the sky turns red, and Daedra swarm the streets of the city. In my time fighting off the Daedric forces, I tried to see if I could reflect some damage on Dagon himself, but he just looked at me like I was a minor inconvenience. Or rather, his feet did. So I fell back on the lore-accurate ending, escorting Martin to the Temple of the One where he'd immediately go Super Saiyan and turn into a giant fucking dragon. He vaporizes Dagon, explodes, and then turns into a statue, Because of fucking course he does. But not before Ocado can interrupt one last time. And that, my friends, is how I beat Oblivion using only potions. So, can you beat Oblivion using only potions? Yeah, you can. It's not always pretty, and it's definitely not the fastest, but it works. This run was all about answering a weird little question and seeing how far I could push the game's alchemy system, and honestly, I'm kind of impressed with how far it got me. Sure, I wasn't doing the fighting most of the time, but that was kind of the point. The potions would do the damage, the potions did the healing, and the potions did the heavy lifting. I was just the guy drinking. I couldn't call this the most practical way to play Oblivion, but it's definitely one of the more creative ones. And somehow, even with all the limitations, it still managed to be fun in its own broken, awkward way. So yeah, you can beat Oblivion using only potions. And if nothing else, it's a good reminder that this game lets you get away with some pretty ridiculous stuff. Thanks for watching, let me know what kind of challenge I should try next, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.